Good evening, everyone. Thanks a lot for joining this session. So we're calling this session as Shaping a Digital Vision, and the reason is we thought you guys have heard a lot about data, but essentially data, more often than not, is a means to an end. And because the fourth industrial revolution is happening, a lot of it has to deal with digitalization, or a lot of it has to deal with how digital engagements are being undertaken. So we thought we'll probably run a panel with few experts in the industry. I'll let them introduce themselves. And then we are going to cover two things primarily. One, how do you measure the value of any digital engagement? And it could be digital / big data / any engagement which you typically undertake with a motive to make an impact on the digital metrics. And the second is the cultural challenges. How do you undertake that? What are the specific challenges people have when they're having a transformation project? And we would want to go through that in detail. So the format of the event is we've got 40 minutes. It's almost 5 o'clock. We realized that we're probably the four men standing between a good glass of beer and a long day over here. So we'll keep it short. We'll try and keep the last 5 to 7 minutes for questions, if you have any. And we'll also wrap up with key takeaways based on what we discuss. We don't have a premeditated script. None of us have practiced anything. Actually, some of us literally just meant. So because the reason is we wanted to make it more conversational rather than specific slides. I'm guessing you guys have already had an overdose of slides over the last few days. So I'm going to kick it off with introductions first. Myself, Abbas. I'm a management consultant by training. I started in Hortonworks last year. I head up innovation and strategy for MIA. And we work with our most strategic customers to help them understand what is the value they will get from a business perspective when they're employing Hadoop and or any parts of our stack. And a few of the things which we do is helping map out what the value drivers could be, helping understand and quantify the business case with standard metrics, NPV, ROI, and all of that, and also working in general about what the digital strategy could be. And then I'll let the panelists introduce themselves. Pierre.
I'm Pierre-Alexandre Potra. I have had many positions in the banking industry, from option trader to where I've discovered IT, to software development, production, and now I manage the application support for global markets, for international loans and asset management for Natixis. At this position, I've been able to have lots of friends, and some are there here. And so we have created together a community which transform our ecosystem, the ecosystem of the global markets and the risk, the finance, the compliance, all the ecosystem. And we work together on a large community around the Hortonworks cluster, or some Hortonworks cluster. He's happy, the salesman is there. And tomorrow they have the business review.
Ronnie Failing, Vice President for Data-Driven Technologies at Airbus. I mainly concentrate on creating the strategic roadmaps for data science, cognitive computing, and artificial intelligence for all three divisions, so helicopter, defense and space, and the commercial branch. And then within there, all the business units and the functions in there, working both in the corporate technical office for some of the more demonstrators, more out there products, as well as with the digital transformation office, which is there to help drive the business as it is right now into a digital age, and then prepare to optimize that based on that.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, my name is Jürgen Urbanski. I'm actually super excited to be back here in Germany. I'm based in Silicon Valley, but previously was with Deutsche Telekom, specifically the IT services division, T-Systems, as their CTO, driving a lot of the innovation of big data in the early days when HTTP was barely a distribution. Today I'm with Silicon Valley Data Science, responsible for the international business, and We are a consulting firm very much focused on driving business value with data, notably building data products and building data-driven businesses. And we've observed a lot of failure patterns, and so that's what I'm here to share those learnings and insights. But that said, perhaps back to Abbas, I think one of the questions that people wonder, so clearly there are many examples we've heard at the conference where Hadoop and big data, broadly speaking, including data science, drives substantial value for the business. But how do you know if you're actually on the right track? Are there any early warnings or early indicators that things are moving in the right direction much before this actually shows up in any hard results?
Yeah, great question. So I'm going to answer that question in a minute, but before that I'm going to play a video because that's going to act as a premise for my answer. Some of you who attended the Partner Day might have seen this video. Anyone who attended the Partner Day when I was presenting? Great, so it's a novel video for everyone.
The amount of data created every day is rapidly outgrowing the carrying capacity of conventional digital storage devices. So researchers are turning to natural genetic code to contain a growing deluge of data. In a recent experiment, researchers at Columbia University and the New York Genome Center were able to store a movie, a computer operating system, and a $50 Amazon gift card on a single drop of DNA. The process relies on DNA's natural ability to rapidly reorganize itself and recombine in complex but predictable patterns. That allows it to be used just like computer code to store and retrieve information. To correct any errors in reconstructing the information stored in the DNA, the scientists used an algorithm originally designed for streaming video on a cell phone. The process cost about $3,500 per megabyte of storage, comparable to the cost of the first computer magnetic disk drive introduced by the IBM Corporation in 1956. But that memory device was so big it had to be carried on a forklift. It could only store a total of 3.5 megabytes of data. A single gram of DNA could hold about 730 billion megabytes of data. In theory, a DNA storage system could reduce the entire Library of Congress to a collection of molecules.
The reason why I pulled up that video is we're in the data business. We started with Hadoop, and a lot of us sitting over here are associated to the data business. And if you look at it fundamentally, and this is not rocket science, by the way, so for those of you who are from Microsoft, they've actually invested $500 million in a startup who are actually making this happen. And Elon Musk tweeted the other day, if this becomes reality, so what's going to happen? Walking Dead? ? Because it's a true thing that cybersecurity today is a challenge with systems and processes, but if eventually humans and DNA starts to transfer data, we'll have a lot of challenges. So the reason why I'm talking about that is, in general, core business models are getting disrupted at a much faster pace than you can imagine, or I could imagine, or any one of us can imagine. And the way to measure, to your question, the way to measure metrics or way to measure digital engagements or futuristic, disruptive, innovation-led new core models need to be different than the standard models. Initially, if you look at any specific engagement, any specific program manager would pick up ROI metrics, net present value, what is the return, what is this churn, and all of that. But a lot of times, those metrics cannot be actually applied to a totally new novel technique because there's no precedent, there is no benchmark. And how do you measure the value and how do you communicate that to the C-suite? Because the investment, more often than not, is way higher than you would imagine. And a lot of times, organizations spend millions of dollars without the return. And it's not that there's no return, but then they're just not able to articulate that. So I'm going to pull up one slide which will give you some insight into that. So if you look at the tombstone and the bottom line, the good thing is all the so-called brands which we hear about, innovative brands, Unilever, Google, Coca-Cola, and all of them, they have started to focus on disruptive projects, and the way they're measuring it is they have de-linked that from their financial performance. So what that allows them to do is that the CDO or the innovation team or whoever, they're not necessarily accountable to the street because the street measures you on revenues, earnings per share, and all of that. And if you start looking at all of those metrics, it becomes very difficult to measure a digital engagement. And that's why we started to develop something what is called as a digital traction metrics. It's, for those of you from venture capital, it shouldn't be very new because a lot of them use metrics like cohort analysis. But in new industries like mining, like utilities, like logistics, you don't have any cohort analysis. For telcos and financial services, retail banking, you might have it, but, or maybe retail as well, but for a lot of them you don't. So to your question, Jürgen, is these are the 4 key areas which we see. So one is the early customer indicators. So if there is a customer who comes onto your website and they are tracking, can you predict that what is the probability that they will also go to another website which is of a competitor? Or the other one, which is users growth. So we all measure unique visitors, we all measure stuff like organic user acquisitions, but the one thing which we don't measure, which is there on the right-hand side, is the bounce rate. So what is the probability that your loyal customer will also become loyal at a competitor? And the reason is, studies show that generally the dynamics of most loyal customers across brands is very similar. And the cost of acquisition is high to get that loyal customer because we target them with a differentiated product. But you know what, actually, you could just target them with the things they want without having to differentiate on a product basis, but just by appealing to a different senses. Now, we all know personalization has taken a different turn, and it's becoming much more personalized in retail, for example, and Zog will be able to tell you about Tesco's or Walgreens, is they have push notification based on your click stream or anything else. In banking, we have multiple different parameters. But the common link is, across all of these digital metrics, a lot of these organizations have started to measure the value by looking at the digital metrics, and you need to start moving away from the standard metrics that we typically would for a large-scale transformation project. The last thing which I do want to mention over here is, if you look at the engagement of customers, we do measure currently number of likes, number of shares, the churn rate, standard in telco, been there, done that forever. But one of the things which has started to evolve is a lot of these Fortune 500 companies are going on a data as a service model. We spoke to a bank yesterday who said that we want to become an IT company. I've spoken to a telco company where they said we want to become a cybersecurity solution provider. So the core business models are getting disrupted. And when you're doing data as a service model, the end customer is not necessarily a B2C guy. The model is B2B, and the end customer is again a Fortune 500 large organization. So how do you measure the value which you're going to get in that case? So a lot of times we tend to equate that in financial metrics, but in the Valley, and you would know as well, Jürgen, a lot of companies have started to engage in what they call as the capital metric. The capital metric is a simple thing, which is you have your weighted average cost of capital, which in layman terms is what is the amount at which you can borrow money from the market. If you put that on the denominator, on the numerator, you have a metric which tells you what is the potential upside if everything was to go correct. We don't measure that, and they take a ratio. And if the ratio is anything which is close to more than 0.5, then there's a high likelihood that between 2 to 4 years, depending on what your engagement is, your project will become successful. So, long story short, the way you measure metrics need to change. A lot of organizations have realized that. For those who haven't, they need to follow suit. Otherwise, you will get tied up in the standard ways and you will never get the value for that. So I'm going to ask the panelists that, what is your view around that period? And Ronnie, any one of you can go first. What is your view? How do you guys measure the value of any digital engagement or big data engagement at your organizations?
In Natixis, we have several, many digital, many big data or machine learning project or application who runs. But what is very close to your question, because remember that I work for the capital market division, where, for example, rather than having 30 million clients on the retail, we have probably 2,000 clients, but very large on the bank. Since 18 months, the small team, but very dynamic team of the marketing has done went from the first analysis in batch for clustering the customer to now real-time clustering surveillance. That means they watch the customer, and what is important is that they don't change from a good cluster to a bad cluster. And it's much, and they do lots of exchange with the business. For example, the computer sees the cluster after they have learned, they have taught the trader, the sales, how to interpret these things. They have done lots of very nice video to explain them, and they watch the cluster, and the guy identifies the real business name of the customer, of the group of customer, and it's very much appreciated. And in our kind of business, you know, the business is king and gives the money for the project. So we have very good relation with the sales now. That improve a lot.
Ronnie?
Well, on our side, you know, I think Jürgen actually had put a LinkedIn article recently that I think reflects very well what some of the difficulties are. You know, in our case, we're not a clickstream analytics company. We're not a marketing. We're not a B2C. Yeah. Not that I know, at least for. We create planes, and it's a very traditional business model at first. So there are lots of challenges, and we're in a highly regulated, well, you as well, industry, but also extremely highly safety conscious industry from its core all the way down. I think what is important in the value proposition at an early stage is really the top level buy-in. It is the CEOs, the C-suite that realize entry barriers are falling. We see competitive business models, but also really competitors arise out of nothing where we didn't see them before. We know our competitors very well typically, and if somebody comes from a completely different direction, we don't want to be surprised. So the strategy that Airbus went is to try on three different levels, I would say. One, let's try to disrupt ourselves before anybody else does so. But we cannot disrupt our own supply chain, our own manufacturing, you know, that we cannot afford. So we try to create a sort of a separate unit that is linked with expertise, but with a different kind of culture, obviously a Silicon Valley culture, that can try to disrupt us. Now that is dangerous, you're playing with the fire, but the hope is that we're going to gain first mover advantage on that. The second part is sort of going on a close level, where we build planes, can we build them a different way? One has heard perhaps about urban mobility, some of the connected fleet. Those are the kind of big demonstrators that Airbus is trying out of the corporate technical office to create. And then we know that internally we need to change our core business. So this is where what Jürgen, I think, rightly names the CDO, we call it the DTO, so the Digital Transformation Officer or the Chief Data Officer, comes into place. And that's where we try to unlock our data that we have, that we are generating, typically, especially in engineering culture, in siloed form, and we put it together. Now, there's definitely a first kind of investment you need to do, and we need to find the key is to find the right projects that serve as lighthouse projects. They can actually showcase this is how it can work on two levels. One, they need to satisfy that project owner, and in that case, we do take rather traditional metrics, such as reducing quality issues. That's something that we can actually show. We can see, hey, you can learn from the past, you can use machine learning, try to see similar situations that you saw in the past and learn from that, and then therefore reduce either contention, quality issues, timing elements. So those are actually quite traditional metrics. At the same time, we're building on the horizontal layer capabilities, both technology-wise, but also strategic-wise, a data lake, extracting the data out of the different SAP systems or the different data silos, and giving access to them in unprecedented form. And that's where you typically have then the upsell, where you unlock constantly new value. The goal is, while driving individual projects that serve the customer, in that case, the business unit directly, prepare the company in such a way that we can actually transform. So The second goal for us is actually to follow the value stream. We're starting in manufacturing. That is our core. That's what we know best. But then we're starting to extend that. We're going into engineering, design, on the other into the supply chain, on the other side into operations and into our customers. So we're creating a journey in the same way that we're creating that data lake and slowly extending it so that we have that complete view from A to Z over our entire life cycle and value chain.
And I think in my view, what you just articulated really encapsulates some of the recipes for success that we see, right? So having a straight line of sight to business outcomes and being able to manage the expectations at the top. So one of the most common failure patterns we see when it comes to mobilizing and motivating the organization for what's ultimately a multi-year journey from being, data starved and data aware all the way to being truly data driven. That's akin to an industrial revolution that's happening. That didn't happen overnight either. And the challenge for a lot of the data leaders, notably CDOs or peers of yours, for instance, that we work with at other companies, is how do you deliver tactical quick wins to mobilize, motivate, keep people excited, while at the same time working on the bigger picture transformation, some of the hard and arguably, dull work of establishing a platform, building out the competencies, and that's a fine line that you have to walk because, for instance, if I look at the boards, the CXOs that we work with, they read about the success stories in the media and they say, oh, Google's doing this and Airbnb is doing that and Uber is doing this. But what never makes it into the media is that this took a lot of hard work. It took a lot of experimentation and only the success bubbles up to the top. So if I had to distill some of the lessons of when things fail, and things fail too often, I think, I would argue the vast majority of enterprises don't yet get the full value, the full potential out of big data, broadly speaking. Mostly it fails because there's a disconnect between, too often it's a technology-driven initiative as opposed to something that has that straight line of sight to the business. And so that's a pattern that we see quite a bit. And of course, that's why some companies are in fact creating a chief data officer who kind of acts like a central nervous system, right? A signal processing capability that stretches to every part of the organization, just like your nerves do. And they're not muscles, but they're processing signals. So you have these small teams, 30, 40, 50 people in a chief data officer team that are trying to enable decisions for 30, 40, 50,000 colleagues across an organization. And that's really the crux of it.
Cool. Thanks a lot. Is this mic working? Am I audible at the back? So those are all great points. And you ended on a point about the failures and which don't come out in the media stories, and you also mentioned about the CDO. We often go to clients and talk about center of excellence and what the organizational structures should be. So we see a lot of organizations having a federated structure, a few of them nascent structure. We typically say that the hybrid model is the best model, which is what the likes of GE and Philips and others follow, which is where, in a very layman's term, is you have the CDO who has a seat at the table. He or she is responsible for the innovation part. They're accountable for all the data-driven innovation, but they're not responsible for it. The responsibility still sits with the CIO organization, who has a dotted line. And the reason is because you don't have to rebuild the whole organization from scratch. You can clearly leverage the CIO's team with a different skill sets. So my question to both of you guys is, as large organizations where there are multiple levels of complexities, when you start undertaking transformation, be it a big data challenge or a digital transformation, there must be resistance. There must be resistance to change, and there must be a lot of cultural changes, a lot of politics, a lot of fiefdoms which you need to navigate around. So how have you guys seen in your organizations, or how have you implemented change, and what are some success recipes around that from a cultural standpoint?
As you said, we are a heavily regulated industry. In the banks, we are now lots of regulation are issued, and we have been obliged, and two silos, that means the global market and the risk silo, which is also our internal regulator. So at first we had, imagine, two silos with political conflicts, because one regulates the other, and the first one gives the figure to the second. So it was difficult, but the new regulation, which asked us probably 20 more computation, so it was impossible to do that stupidly with normal techniques, and also that will have cost us a lot, because we already have, imagine, 35,000 computing cores, which during all the day, 24 hours a day, compute the bank's position. So we have to be smart and not hit the Seine in Paris. And these two silos have been obliged to move. We have been obliged to disrupt ourselves and to start breaking the two silos and to work completely differently. That means it's not sending the data of the two silos in a data lake. Is now the two silos produce the real production on the data lake. And what you said was very important is this first flagship project gives the example. I think to have a long change, a good change on the long run in a company, you have to give the example. Then after to sell the project, to show the success, to show that you can start think far away, but start small. You can fail. It's important to show that in the company. Now we are in the phase, and participating in this kind of events is also important. We start to talk, to show the progress, to exchange with our colleagues from other banks. The example is important.
And how much of that change, just follow-up question, do you drive top-down with vision and aspiration versus more organically bottom-up that generates excitement and buy-in?
In the bank industry, we have a very strong operational services with lots of budget, with enough budget, I can say, and so they are able to take decisions themselves. You know, it's like two living animals changing themselves. So at the level of the business, we have been able with our colleagues to explain to the business that it's possible to change, and we have to change. So the first pilot project showed the business that works. And they asked us to go much faster than was anticipated, and it's why now we are in production. So in our case, what comes from the top is more the financial objective and the financial figures of the bank. So it is what is important for us.
There's also a strong bottom-up component, though, right, with the community.
Yes. We are a community. That means that these two first parts of the two first silos start to work together. And now, 2 years after, we are able to say that in our ecosystem, more than 60 or 70% of the development teams are using or very close to use or very sensible or starting to use big data or machine learning. You know, when you start, for example, disrupting a silo, and that you show something and that you put a little machine learning on top, that means you oblige people to think of their process and to show nice things, that has a very big impact to everybody.
I think on our side, we try to, as you mentioned, not start necessarily from the technology perspective. Yeah. You know, and this is why in a traditional company like ours, perhaps, the essence was really to create almost a separate organization that's outside of ICT or IT organization that had certain metrics, that certain cost factors, a lot of parts outsourced, and they have a different kind of position at the traditional start. So we had a very business-focused organization that said, okay, let's see where the drivers are, because those are the ones that later get you the high-level buy-in. Top level said, we have a problem, we need to solve it. Let's try it. hire a couple of people from outside. I come from, like Jürgen, from Silicon Valley, so I have no idea about aerospace, no idea about industry really, and trying to crack my head against that. So coming from a different perspective, but I think the third part as well is, bring in perhaps a different company, a startup, a mature startup that can actually be one of those change agents in almost a fail-safe mode, so that they can work and suddenly people see, holy shit, this is something really good. So with that kind of level of top-level buy-in, we went all the way to the shop floor, and those were the ones that were actually really well receiving these new methods. Much easier than doing a complete organizational change. And once we saw these kind of lighthouse projects, then the subsequent buy-in was much, much easier. And slowly we started creating an organizational change that enabled us to go more horizontally. But we didn't start with the organization except here's the top level buy-in, very small team, but extremely business focused with a software idea, data-driven mindset. And starting, okay, here is where we want to start. And then once you bring in external, you should have probably a team that has a little bit of a fail-safe method, meaning that they are there to judge a project not on its technology, but on the business impact or the return of investment that this can bring. And that, in general, creates cultural change. So these groups are not paid for by the project, because when you pay by the project, you will make the project successful no matter what. And we don't want that. We want them to decide, you know what, this was a great idea, it just didn't work, we pull out. So that they have that capability and they're actually rewarded on that. I don't like the expression really fail fast. We don't want to fail. But what we want is to take a certain risky route, saying like, you know what, if this works, this can really be great. I think it can. And then have the levers to say, no, it doesn't work. And out of that, I have a really good insight. I know that this is not the right path, so probably it's that. So that you design the project in such a way that a failure will actually have a positive return on that for another aspect.
And one follow-up question is, so what I'm hearing from both of you is that both of you said that show the success and then everyone will follow suit. So you also mentioned that, Ronnie, you also said that you need to start small, show them. Specifically from a big data perspective, and if I look at the pace at which industries are getting disruptive, and which I mentioned to earlier, it's not necessarily only, sometimes you don't have the luxury to show them the success and ask 30,000, 40,000 people to follow suit. So if that is the case, and a lot of industries like automotive, every automotive manufacturer has released that they want to become a mobility company or something else. So how do you guys make sure that you're incentivizing the right behaviors that you actually seek at a large organizational level?
But a good example is not a sure way to have people moving. It depends of the manager. But it's very interesting. Some people here knows many people, many teams. It's a general way. You show the success help people to move, but some people will move because at the end they will be ashamed not having moved. That means you see how the innovation goes into the business. There are early adopters and very late adopters, and you don't use the same marketing, or you don't talk to them, the same way.
So you're creating peer pressure in a way.
What?
So you're creating peer pressure in a way.
Eh? I'm sorry.
Well, I think so.
That's right.
I think yes. You have the lighthouse projects. What we target with a lot of these lighthouse projects is, everybody thinks it's exciting to create a new project, new business, but it's actually much, much harder, especially for an ROI perspective.
Yeah.
So what we try to target is where it really hurts and where we can reduce that pain. So some of our blue collars on the shop floor, they feel they get hit over the head if they do errors. Well, if I can help them to reduce the errors, they're actually pulling the project rather than me pushing it. So that is one level, and we have great adoption on that. The second, these technologies are actually quite exciting. What they don't like, if somebody comes in and says, I'll show you how I can do it better. It's like the problem of showing somebody to fish. So one of the important things is these business unit owners, they're the ones that hold the real knowledge that we need to unlock. We need to sit together with them in the first level. But what we now do is we want to create an army of people, not in that isolated organization. We're actually training people in their business function. We're using MOOCs, so massive open online courses, and they're being picked up like crazy across the company. So we're trying to take our people with us. They're not going to become a data scientist. They have their business function. But they're actually very excited to pull it in. So we get their buy-in by actually saying, we're going to enable you. We're not going to tell you what to do. We're not going to be the smart guys and you're the one who has to use those new tools. No, you'll build them. You'll say what you want. So I think that is one of that we think or we feel right now is driving a lot of adoption.
I 100% agree. The idea is to build armies and to have the innovation, the new way of working, which goes into the business and everybody. And what we use the flagship program also, as you have said, to easier the work for the other. That means we create starter kits, we create video, and so the people who come after have example, or for them it's very much easier to be empowered and to work.
Correct.
For example, we have created special documents to, as we said, to come from 20 people of the beginning, the initiate people, to go to the thousands of people. And we are creating these documents. Now we are going bigger, and now we are creating different documents or videos for different level of people, and we distribute that a lot. And that works very well. And I completely agree. When you talk to the people, you don't have to say, you will work this way, you don't have to explain.
Okay. Well, actually, that begs the question. So, with the advent of AI, so Ronnie, you've often been a very recognized, speaker and author in pushing the frontiers of artificial intelligence. And it sounds like you're saying, fortunately, the data infrastructure is there, and that check mark there. You have some great showcases, but in fact, as you roll out more AI use cases, frankly, it is a machine telling a human what the better answer is. And so how does that dynamic change of adoption, resistance, excitement?
Yeah, it's actually quite a struggle, because in these new technologies, the air gets quite thin on both levels, skill set level, adoption capability, and also perhaps eventually acceptance. We try to be really positive about it, and that's the strategy that we employ in order to create artificial intelligence projects, and actually a very large base of that at Airbus. So the way that we try to think about, in the 90s, where you had the expert systems, they basically would say, this is how you do things. We try to target the complex interactions that humans have, and give them the ability to make better decisions based on the information that is relevant at that very moment. So that somebody in the shop floor has 200 decisions to make today. We're not going to make that today he can do 400. No, we want to make those 200 in a smarter way, that there are less errors, because the error that happens when you do a wrong decision results typically in overtime. Nobody likes overtime. Even though you get paid more, it's still a pain, especially if it's in Christmas. So you want to feel better about the decisions. These guys are actually really smart. It's just that they don't have access to the right information across the entire silo. They don't know what's happening in the next station. They can't see that level across, or they can't find that information in the slew of documents that we have. So this is our first enablement, to give them easier access, contextualized access that is relevant for them. And that interaction model, I think, is successful for AI, gives us into virtual assistant roles, and then the decisions can become smarter and smarter. And of course, we will increase the autonomy level in there, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we replace functions. I think some of the functions that are in threat, of course, is when you have silos that are doing the same thing, and now you're combining them. But I mean, I think there we can also increase the strength of the work.
So, in the interest of time, I probably have to wrap up this interesting discussion. The one thing which I will ask, listening about AI, and that's a very interesting transition, is a lot of the people I've met over here, 1,500, 2,000, whatever people is, they come from different parts of the business. A few of them are technology, data, and a few of them work directly in the business, right? I hear a lot of times that, and both of you guys said as well, that you have to create armies. So essentially starting with human beings. So at your organizations, how do you guys measure, or is there a new way of measuring performance in these activities? And the reason I'm saying is, the slide which I pulled it up, I was discussing at a summit earlier, and I said a lot of organizations are delinking compensation to performance, because studies suggest that the upside which you have by giving, specifically in financial services, I mean, we all read about the high bonuses you guys make, but anyways, that the upside which you have is much, much less compared to the downside which you have by not paying the majority. So, for example, Zalando in the UK, they have a crowdsourced app where they say that every meeting you attend, every presentation you make, every customer you speak to, every person you talk to, they give you feedback. And it's a crowdsourced based app, and your entire 360-degree behavior is noted, and that's how you're measured. So it's not your manager, or you don't get along with your manager, or it's a hierarchical process, so there's no bureaucracy around that. So at large organizations, what is your viewpoint? Are you guys seeing any changes in how you're measuring employee performance to help further that and creating the army, or is the same thing?
It's funny that you speak about that, because since 2 weeks I am embarked in a pilot program organized by our mother company, the group of the Banque Populaire and Caisse d'Épargne, which will measure this for me. So okay. I know that this kind of thing is starting.
I think, you know, I would definitely hope that we're embarking on that journey. I think we're quite early on that, but one of the unlocking elements, I think, is digital communication. So new tools. We're very email and document laden. People hoard the information because they feel protected. What I would like to use is the strength of open source drivers, the same kind of mindset that is behind it. Why do I want to share my knowledge? Why do I want to tell everybody about it? Because they will use my name, they will sort of further me. So it's the network that you do create, and the recognition of that network. So I think there is a tendency already to this 360-degree view employee. That's something that we have implemented not long ago. And I think it is more and more, you know, what your peers think, how you can help them. It's much more rewarding, I think, at the end. And I think that will encourage that kind of sharing behavior, the similar thing that we saw that's so strong with open source.
Okay. So to end the session, I think I've heard a lot of things. I'll summarize 3 key pointers, but then I'll go around the table. And if each one of you can tell 1 or 2 takeaways for the audience, that if you're starting on a digital journey, or if you've already started, what are the 2 most important things that you need to hear? The new thing for me, which I heard from yourself, Ronnie, is that you guys are doing massive online courses internally to enable the organization. That was new for me. The other new thing which I heard from you guys is, again, the way you talked about show the success, and not from only the lighthouse projects, but bringing in the startups and the failure prediction. So those are my 2 things. If you can go around the horse, 2 key takeaways for everyone that they can take away. Pierre? So if you can summarize 2 key takeaways for the audience,
okay,
that what should they keep in mind if they are starting their digital engagement or any transformation?
You can start.
Okay. I think I would say start and read his blog. Start from the business drivers. They're the ones that unlock it. Don't start with the technology. The technology is a means to the end. At the end, you want to drive business, either improve the business or create new businesses, which is much harder. It comes typically a little bit later at stage. Because if you start new businesses or new business models, you might go on a tangent off, and then you're on your own. You know, you get the support once you sort of improve your existing business, and out of that drive new business models. I think the second part is probably have the top buy-in. They need to recognize that something has to change. They need to give that liberty. If you don't have an internal group that can drive this, that is independent, you know, work with an external company as well, but then eventually you need to transition that in.
Well, to segue that, my one point is if you really want to move the needle for the business, you have to break some eggs and bend some rules, right? And too many companies, the change leaders, the data leaders, they're literally suffocated by this bureaucracy when it comes to getting budget, bureaucracy when it comes to getting people. If you think about data science is something that's very experimental. You don't know what you can learn. Yet stakeholders are saying, well, I'm spending X on data science, give me a precise deterministic return on my investment. Complete nonsense, right? And so if you want to move the needle, then don't be afraid to push back on bureaucracy that's suffocating. Requires a lot of education, a lot of evangelization, but you have to break some eggs to move the needle.
You have to remember that innovation is a very long-term journey, that you can have lighthouse project with lots of bling bling. It's nice, but you have to work on a long pace to aim a medium-term success. But also, what you said is very important. All the projects that I have seen who start with a infrastructure only big data project fail miserably. Now, if you have not started, I think most of you have already started, but what is nice is now the technology is there, you have a contractor or people to help you, but think 95% of your effort should be in convincing and going to talk to the business. I've done many business presentations. It's very important. You will see after some months that will start to move. But this month-long effort are like when you prepare marathon or things like that, all these sports that pay after some months.
Cool.